Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode of the X Button, Season 4, Episode 12. I am your host, Alejandro, and once again, I am doing another solo episode like I did 2 weeks ago. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, it's like this is going to be more of a common occurrence. Some of the guests that usually I have lined up, something happens, or kind of like the timing is kind of weird. Like right now, it's a miracle that I'm also recording right now an episode because this is like some sort of spring break, Holy Week vacation time here in El Salvador. So it's like technically I'm on vacation, but I was like, I'm not gonna miss an episode. I think I can do another one solo. And there's a few things I need to cut up on since last week's episode was a spoiler cast for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which has gotten quite a couple views just in the video alone, and a lot of listens in the audio, which I'm kind of really pleased about. I really love that episode. So it's like I have always said that I always want to hit every episode at least until the holidays in December. So here I am again, and let's see how this one goes. And just as a single reminder that this is the X Bottom Podcast, or gaming podcast that posts every Fridays from 10 a.m. onwards, God willing. Available in the YouTube channel Escape Gaming, as well as most audio services around the world. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. You can find links in the RSS feed at tinyurl.com/escapegaming. If you enjoy our show, give us a like and subscribe. So, what have I been playing? Not much, I'll say. The post Final Fantasy VII Rebirth blues are like really hard. It's like the calm down has been really strong. Let's just say like I just can't stress enough how much I loved Rebirth. Like how much it delivered and then some. Like everything I wanted out of it. And even as I am like digesting that ending, as you can hear some of my thoughts of said ending in the spoiler chat of the spoiler cast from last week's episode. Is like, even my complicated feelings of that ending aside, like that game was just such a delight that everything else is kind of like pale in comparison. Like I know, like as we were recording last week's episode, both Rise of the Ronin and Dragon's Dogma 2 were just about to launch, and Dragon's Dogma 2 was the one game that me and Paul, like in our DMs, have been like we were kind of chatting about that, like the lead up to that game was kind of like giving some weird, very similar like Elden Ring pre-launch hype chatter that I was seeing from some of the people that I was following online, that I was like, could this actually be like the big game for 2024 based on how a lot of people are talking about this? Because I remember exactly that happening with Elden Ring, and I'm gonna get into a few of the news items a little later, because I want to kind of save my thoughts about Dragon's Dogma 2, because I did play a little bit, like maybe 5 or 6 hours total. I think I played of that, but then I'm gonna save it to why I've only played that a little and haven't kept playing, because those news are kind of pertinent as to why. And then as for Rise of the Ronin, I actually just bought it yesterday. I was actually still in the fence, because obviously, like when I saw the reviews, obviously Dragon's Dogma 2 reviewed better than this one. Rise of the Ronin was at a 77 to 80 Metacritic, which is not bad. It's like I love, for long-time listeners know that it's like I'm a huge proponent of always finding the fun of games that are like in the 7 range or things like that, because it's like I don't just live by the 9 or above or just masterpieces like certain people. And but I was like, okay, like I just convinced Paul to get us Dragon's Dogma 2, so I'm not gonna be able to like convince him to get another one immediately, especially because they're both like open world games. So it's like and he usually has only bandwidth for one. So I was like, yeah, maybe like I could make him wait, but then like I just leave it to him. Like he'll probably like tell about it, kind of like so some weird stuff happening in his life. So it's like he just doesn't have like the time right now to like really play. And I watch a couple streams. I was actually watching a streamer, Runbi. You can find her on both YouTube and Twitch. Like she has been playing Rise of the Ronin, and the more I kept like watching like what she did, especially she has an amazing clip about what she did with the game's character creator and how perfect that was. Like the characters that she created and how that played out in the story. That was so meta. I'm not gonna spoil it. Just go to look it up. It's in her socials. It's like that convinced me, especially seeing more that it's like a mix of the high-paced combat that I love from Team Ninja's Ninja Gaiden series, and even something like Neo. It mixed with like junk food style open world game. I was like, yeah, I bought it yesterday, and I had it installed. I haven't played it yet. I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna play it after I record, but that's something that I hopefully will be able to talk about more next week. So yeah, not much of playing right now. Just kind of like, again, just the lulls of finishing a my most anticipated game of the year, and then having to come down from that. And so far, that most anticipated game, like, still like the leading champ for me this year. So thankfully, the fact that I haven't played much didn't prevent the gaming world to have so many stuff happening. So yeah, let's not beat around the bush. Press X for some news. Story number one. This broke literally late last night, and this was a long time coming because the Embracer Group is just a complete shit show that has just been divesting or closing a bunch of studios because of their failed $2 billion deal that completely like put that entire group in the disarray. So this was already talked about, and it finally happened, at least partially. In some way, I'm gonna read about it. It's like Take-Two purchases Gearbox Entertainment from Embracer for $460 million. Story by Marcus Stewart from Game Informer. Embracer Group has divested Gearbox Entertainment from its stable of video game studios, with Take-Two Interactive purchasing the company for $460 million. This sale is part of Embracer's massive ongoing restructuring designed to cut costs after a planned $2 billion deal with Saudi Arabia-backed Savvy Games Group fell through in 2023. The sale comes 3 years after Embracer acquired Gearbox for $1.3 billion in 2021. Which, by the way, parenthesis, nothing exemplifies this shit show that is Embracer, that they bought this company for $1.3 billion, they had to sell it for just half because they're that desperate. So, continuing the story, this move means Embracer no longer owns Gearbox's development entities, such as Gearbox Software, Gearbox Montreal, and Gearbox Studio Quebec, nor franchises such as Borderlands, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, Homeworld, Risk of Rain, Brothers in Arms, and Duke Nukem. These assets would be acquired by Take-Two, which owns Rockstar Games and 2K among other labels. Closing of the transaction is expected to take place in fiscal year Q1 2024-2025, pending customary regulatory approvals. In a press release from Take-Two, Gearbox confirms it has 6 titles in the works. 5 are sequels, and 2 of those sequels are from the Borderlands and Homeworld franchises. It also has an announced new IP in development. However, Embracer does retain other branches subsidiaries of Gearbox. That includes Gearbox Publishing San Francisco, soon to be renamed, which has publishing rights to the Remnant franchise, Hyper Light Breaker, and other upcoming unannounced titles. Additionally, Embracer is keeping Cryptic Studios, the Neverwinter Online Star Trek Online guys, Lost Boys Interactive, and Captured Dimensions. According to the press release, these companies will be welcomed and integrated into other parts of Embracer Group in the coming period. So in a press release, Embracer CEO Lars Wingfors writes, "Today's announcement marks the result of the final structured divestment process and is an important step in transforming Embracer into the future with notably lower net debt and improved free cash flow. Through the transaction, we lower business risk and improve profitability as we transition to becoming a leaner and more focused company. After evaluating several options for Gearbox, I'm happy that we have reached a solution that is in the best interest of all stakeholders." Fuck you. "Randy and the team have been great team members throughout the past years, and I would like to thank them all for that. As one of the world's greatest games developers, I am confident that Gearbox will continue to innovate and thrive in their new home within Take-Two." Gearbox founder and CEO Randy Pitchford adds, "As a significant long-term Embracer Group shareholder, I believe in the strategy for the Embracer Group going forward, and I'm completely convinced that this transaction is the best possible scenario and an obvious net positive arrangement for Embracer Group, for Take-Two, and of course for Gearbox Entertainment. My primary interest is always Gearbox, including our talent and our customers. I want to personally ensure fans of our games that this arrangement will ensure that the experiences we have in development at Gearbox will be the best it can possibly be. Earlier this month, Embracer announced it was selling Saber Interactive for $500 million. It has also laid off employees across several studios, canceled a multitude of in-development games, and shut down Free Radical Design and Volition games entirely." It says like, there's nothing that I have hated more than what had happened with Embracer, especially after their massive acquiring spree that happened like in post-pandemic, or at least just in the early years of the pandemic, that post 2020 2021 era, where they were just acquiring everything, and then everyone wondering, a lot of like smart industry analysts analyzing, pardon the pun, about like, okay, you're acquiring all of this, what's the end goal? Like, do you have like the money to be able to like sustain everything that you're acquiring? And it was clear that they didn't. And it's insane to me that it took one negotiation with that Saudi Arabia group falling through for this entire shit show to happen. And it sucks that it cost us Volition Games, the guys that made Saints Row, obviously, unfortunately under Volition's own volition, they released that Saints Row game that just wasn't very good. But people can go listen to our 2022 episodes of the X-Bot, where like, when that game came out at a time of like extreme famish, I didn't mind it, because it was like, oh, it's a new game, and okay, this is kind of fun, but it was like pale in comparison to like what Saints Row was. And like now, like more removed, with time removed, it was like, yeah, it's like that game was not it. And it's unfortunate that cost Volition that entire studio, even though I know a lot of the people from that studio, I think they already reformed the new one, so it's like a lot of that talent is still it's still alive and well somewhere else. But it's just kind of like a perfect example of just like what a mess it's been with Embracer, and just how bad the quality of some of the stuff that's been coming out of that game has been. Like, for example, there was the South Park game that came out this week that I got to play with IGN's Travis Northup, because he did the review for IGN. He gave it a 3 out of 10. That was actually pretty accurate. It was like, that game was just so heartbreaking, because it's like the first 2 South Park games were so good, and that came out from THQ that's on under Embracer. So it's like there's just something weird happening with Embracer that is like, the more they're able to sell off a lot of this stuff that they acquired, the better, because it's like I just hate the idea that they probably promised stability to a lot of these independent studios. They gobbled them all up, and then because they want to appease the shareholders, like that fucking idiot said, like Lars Wingforce, it's like it's just costing a lot of livelihoods, like, because they have to appear the all important shareholders. It's like don't go public, companies. It's like it's the worst when like private companies that go public and they rely on shareholders, because then it's like they do everything to just appease them. Workers be damned, or everything be damned. So all in pursuit of growth, and it's just sad, because it's like right now it's like the Embracer Group it's officially like one of the biggest like laughing stocks of the gaming industry, and this kind of news will always be good news. That if they're able to just like okay, we divested, but let's keep divesting, let's give it to someone, because it's like I'd rather that than them dying because they have to appease the shareholders. And it's just so ironic that insert Biff Tannen Back to the Future 2 meme is like, this reminds me so much of like what happened with THQ back in like 2012, 2013. And then they had to like sell off a bunch of stuff because they went bankrupt. It's like funny enough how like history can repeat itself in some way. And Embracer Group obviously is like, it's just funny because they THQ Nordic wasn't the original name. They like absorbed that name and they were like, yeah, let's continue the THQ name, even though that name was already tainted by like the bankrupt old THQ from like a decade ago. So it's like, and similar stuff are happening to them. But at them is like, it's funny that what the straight THQ was their UDraw device, that they invested so much on that and that failed for them. So they put them in a rough spot, and their games were just not selling as much as they needed to kind of get out of the red. That's why like, it went bankrupt. But with Embracer Group, it's like they just overextended. They just kept buying and buying stuff, and now look where they are. So congrats on at least a good portion of Gearbox now landed under 2K. It's so funny that a lot of people, like when they see Borderlands, they see that the 2K logo is like, no matter what, it's like Borderlands was always published by 2K, but Gearbox was independent. They were just kind of like on a publishing agreement with 2K to publish that game. So a lot of people would have thought it's like, oh yeah, Gearbox is owned by 2K, but that was not the case. It's funny now that is true. And at least now the publishing arm for Borderlands, a big seller, it's now like it's like all in one family now. So I think they had I don't know, I thought I saw it on Twitter that this basically already confirmed Borderlands 4, because I know that has been like percolating. So but that obviously that's coming. Borderlands 3, complicated, feelings I have about that game. It's fun, but it's like it still was my least favorite Borderlands. But there's still something about Borderlands, and I still do believe that I rather them continue doing their own thing as their non-live service looter, because the looter shooter being so emblematic and so tied up together to the idea of like live services and MMO lights is like, I feel that genre can like thrive outside the MMO light kind of like that's been associated with more, and I feel Borderlands is kind of like that. So I would like more of that, because I know a lot of people were lamenting that Borderlands 3 wasn't a live service. I was like, that actually is like probably one of their biggest, like the biggest selling point is that it's not that. It's still more Borderlands. What the problem with Borderlands 3 was that the main story with those like streamers sucked, but the DLC was really good. So that's why like I have complicated feelings with that one. But I love playing that game with my friend Josh, who was a big Borderlands fan. Like, I know that during the pandemic when those DLCs kept like popping, that was like a constant that I kept playing with him. So yeah, congrats on Gearbox escaping the sinking ship. I hope others escape that sinking ship, particularly Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal. Like Crystal, I love their games. I love the Tomb Raider, their Tomb Raider trilogy. The rebooted trilogy was really good. Eidos Montreal, the Guardians of the Galaxy game was just so surprisingly excellent, and the more I get away from it, is like I appreciate that game more than the disappointment that is Spider-Man 2. Like, it told a much better story. It felt like it had more heart than Spider-Man. So I would hate for those like studios to also go under, but they gotta divest. Especially when it's so funny, like Square Enix divested from those studios so quickly. Like they sold 3, like Crystal Dynamics, Eidos Montreal, and Square Enix Montreal. Like got out of there for $300 million, which was like dirt cheap. So it's like I would love for them to like find a new home. Microsoft, take Crystal Dynamics. I don't care. Like, take them. Like, do you have some sort of association with Crystal Dynamics now, with like the exclusivity deal what they did with Rise of the Tomb Raider for 1 year back in 2015, and how they're helping them with how Crystal Dynamics is helping them with Perfect Dark. So I would rather them be under them, but obviously also Microsoft is also in a weird position right now with, are they gonna keep like expanding? Can they handle everything they have? It's like, it's just weird times in the industry. But this divestment of Gearbox from Embracer and to Take-Two, I see it as a win. Story number 2. I bet like when my buddy Sebastian saw this, he probably screamed, and I just laughed, because it's like, I know how much he hates multiplayer games. So Marvel Rivals is a team-based hero shooter from NetEase Games. Story by Brian Shea from Game Informer. The Marvel universe is expansive and chock-full of some of pop culture's greatest heroes. NetEase Games has taken the word hero literally and placing the characters from Marvel in a free-to-play 6v6 hero shooter. Marvel Rivals promises to bring the most popular and iconic superheroes and supervillains to the arena with destructible environments, unique team-up skills, and more. Marvel Rivals offers 6v6 PvP action featuring arenas from across the Marvel multiverse, including Asgard and Tokyo 2099. The title touts a deep roster of heroes and villains to choose from, including members of the Avengers, Guardians of the Galaxy, X-Men, and more, all with unique team-up skills that play off various synergies between heroes. The closed alpha in May will feature more than a dozen characters, while the announced trailer features 18 characters that represent the current roster. The roster so far includes Black Panther, Doctor Strange, Groot, Hulk, Iron Man, Loki, Luna Snow, Magic, Magneto, Mantis, Namor, Penny Parker, The Punisher, Rocket Raccoon, Scarlet Witch, Spider-Man, Storm, and Star-Lord. If your favorite Marvel hero villain isn't on the initial roster, NetEase promises a robust post-launch roadmap. According to the company, each seasonal drop will introduce new playable characters and maps. Marvel Rivals is one of our most ambitious development projects, Jay Ong, head of Marvel Games, said in a press release. Since the conceptualization of the game and throughout our collaboration, our Marvel team has poured our hearts and souls into this project, and we're thrilled to work with the incredible team at NetEase Games to help deliver the ultimate superhero team-based PvP shooter. The story of Marvel Rivals features Doctor Doom and his 2099 counterpart forcing universes to collide in the time stream entanglement, creating new worlds. Superheroes and supervillains from the multiverse must band together and fight other groups of multiversal characters to defeat the two Dooms and save the multiverse. NetEase Games touts its team members who worked in franchises like Battlefield and Call of Duty as being instrumental in the development of Marvel Rivals, but the studio operates with a global team of developers. Marvel Rivals is currently in development for PC with a closed alpha kicking off in May. To sign up for the upcoming test, you can visit marvelrivals.com. This hero shooter, if you go look at videos, if you look at screenshots, it is such a carbon copy of Overwatch that this would be like what Rick Hogue from Hogue Law would say, that is like flying too close to the sun, where it's like you're just so similar, but you have just tiny things that are different enough that prevents you from being sued. But it's like it's just so lifted from that game, and coming from NetEase and a Chinese company that they're well known for lifting assets or feeling like they're lifting inspired assets from other stuff. It's like it's par for the course for me. And I would say that at least this is free, because Overwatch didn't start free. You had to buy it, and obviously they made Overwatch 2 PvP a free-to-play thing, and they had to cancel the PvE stuff, completely rendering Overwatch 2's reason of existence moot, and they screwed the original game because of that. I don't know if a team-based hero shooter has a place now. If this had launched a year or two after the original Overwatch, I would have believed it, because that was still nascent battle royale times. So it's like PUBG was just gaining traction. Fortnite wasn't Fortnite yet, or like what it became. So it's like I feel like the industry moved away from hero shooters now. No one has been doing hero shooters. Overwatch 2 is barely clinging right now. Like, so that game's fall from grace is really catastrophic. So will this succeed? I mean, with the Marvel name, I kind of want to say yes, but the thing is that if you go look at sales numbers, despite like the success of Marvel at the box office, but not so much now recently. Like, they're actually bombing now, like especially what happened with the Marvels last fall. And even though completely separate studio with Madame Web, how that also crashed and burned, is like it feels like Marvel's like grip in pop culture is like slowly deteriorating. That's just kind of how I know I've said it many times that my hold of Marvel really broke in 2023. Like, I got so tired of that brand that even Spider-Man 2, like, as much as there's some good in that game, I already said my piece with that game, like how unfortunate it was that my initial experience of that game was just so buggy, on top of like some other disappointments that I had, that it still became like a big disappointment for me at the end of the day. It's just like I don't have the rope that I have with Marvel like I used to have, where I was like so diehard for it and so championing them, like nailing a cinematic universe and all of that, that I feel now that seeing that the brand is trying to encroach into the game space slightly more and more at a time where people are getting tired and just want other stuff, kind of like how we saw with Dune, how like, even though that's still an adaptation of a really old book, how fresh that feels in comparison to everything else. That right now I feel like the arts industry need more variety outside just Marvel. So this one, at least starting as a free-to-play thing, I will see what it does. It's just starting on PC, so that's a big no for me. I know that I was looking at Leaker Miller, who is the guy that has been leaking a bunch of stuff that gives me some hope for Suicide Squad. That kind of like that. Apparently, this was supposed to also come out to console, but because it's just an alpha, that's why they use it on PC. But apparently, that's kind of like in the cards. When it comes out whenever it does on console, I'll try it out then. Let's see. I have no hopes personally, because it's just not my kind of game, and I just kind of want to see what it does in the market. Like, could it like reignite what Overwatch lost? We'll see. Sticking in Marvel land, this happened over at GDC, because GDC was occurring when me and Paul were recording our spoiler cast. Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra is Skydance's Captain America / Black Panther game, arriving next year. Story by Marcus Stewart from Game Informer. Skydance New Media's mysterious World War II Marvel game has a title, Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra. It also has its first trailer and a release window. First announced in 2022 at a Marvel Games showcase, or Disney showcase, that I remember me and Paul reacted to. The game stars Captain America and Black Panther Azuri, who is the grandfather of T'Challa. The trailer shows them pursuing the mutual goal of taking down the Nazis' Hydra, though for their own personal reasons. Hailing from different worlds, neither is particularly fond of the other's methods, which draws them into conflict. The game also stars Gabriel Jones of the Howling Commandos and Wakanda spy leader Nanali. First revealed at GDC, check out the first cinematic trailer. That's linked in that article. You can go look it up on YouTube too. Marvel 1943 is a linear single-player experience where you'll occupy the roles of all 4 characters at various points, providing different perspectives on the narrative and the war. The project is led by Skydance president Amy Hennig, best known as the principal writer of the Uncharted franchise. Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra is coming in 2025, though platforms are currently unknown. You can learn more about how Skydance is approaching the game's storytelling by reading the 2022 interview feature with Amy Hennig and Skydance story consultant Mark Bernardian that Game Informer posted 2 years ago. Monkey's Paw scenario. I love Amy Hennig, or I think I did. The Uncharted trilogy on PS3 was back then it was my jam. I fucking loved that trilogy. Uncharted 2, still up there in my top 10 favorite games of all time. I still love Uncharted more than I did The Last of Us, which recently, especially I recently did a kind of a reassessment of what my top 25 favorite games of all time were, especially in light of Rebirth, because that Rebirth absolutely made it to that top 10. The Last of Us wasn't that top 10, and I dropped it all the way back down to number 24 on my 25 list, because I've kind of grown a little resentful about what Last of Us kind of did for the industry, especially because it's I trace the pursuit of what Last of Us did to the insane budget that we see with Spider-Man 2, and kind of putting Sony in that budget that just leads to just complete unsustainability. So, but Uncharted 2 is still something that I still champion, a game that mixes its cinematic ambition with insane Spielbergian pacing and a mastery of the set piece that is still not replicated. It hasn't been replicated since. Even I know Naughty Dog tried hard to replicate that with Uncharted 3, and they kind of went a little overboard, but they kind of missed the deft hand that they had with Uncharted 2, and just how perfectly developed most of that game was, last boss fight aside. So Amy Hennig has not put out a game since Uncharted 3, and we know already Uncharted 3 is kind of controversial because a lot of people think that's the worst from the trilogy. I have a really soft spot for that one. There's been the times where I've said that Uncharted 3 is my personal favorite at times, but Uncharted 2 is still the watermark for me. But no game from her. She was doing after she got removed from Uncharted 4 in 2014. She went to EA to do that Star Wars Ragtag game that she was working on for 3 years, and that got canceled when EA did some weird pivots outside single player stuff. That was the year of the loot box fiasco, and then after that happened, Amy Hennig kind of went MIA. I know she had some writing credit in Forspoken, but she didn't quite write that game. She developed the concept with Gary Whitta, but it's they overplayed her involvement and then downplay her involvement when that game came out, and we already know what people thought about Forspoken. I thought it was fine, but that game was not beloved. In fact, a lot of people dare say it was one of the worst games of last year. I massively disagree with that, but it was it definitely wasn't great, but it was decent. But she hasn't really put out stuff, and then she finally joined us Skydance, and she announced that she was working both on a Marvel game and a Star Wars game, which is so fun to be okay, so she's gonna get another crack at a Star Wars game. If you look at the 1943 Rise of Hydra trailer, it definitely looks really pretty. It's the production value of what they're doing with Unreal Engine 5, and you have to call it out. It has to be called out. It's in first glance, you could when you're looking at it, when people were scrolling on Twitter/X, and so some clips, some people were what's this trailer for this movie? And then people were no crap, that's the game. Obviously, that's just still a trailer. They keep saying, no, this is how the game's gonna look. Yeah, of course. But we definitely have to see what that game is. The idea of it being a linear single-player experience, that does appeal to me, because it's that was Amy Hennig's strengths. That was Uncharted's strengths. My big question has been, especially because Uncharted has been dormant for so long, and Uncharted 4 and The Lost Legacy kind of toyed around with a more open environment for Uncharted. If this game plays more to the strengths of Amy's Uncharted trilogy that were definitely more linear, would it work? Has she found something with these 4 characters, which are the Black Panther, Captain America, Gabriel Jones, and the spy leader from Wakanda, Nanali, for kind of a multi-product, different chapters, a linear storytelling that will work? I want to believe at the same time, also this being a Marvel game is like the monkey's paw scenario. It's like, yeah, finally, Amy will finally have another game finally come out after almost 14 years since the last time she fully put out a game. But it's on a property that I'm so ambivalent around these days that I'm like, I would hope that at least the underlying game is so strong that I get over the fact that I'm just tired of the Marvel property. So, yeah, it's like, we'll see. I wish the best for Amy. Like, she has been dealt like a really bad hand. And we also don't know if it's just been bad hands dealt to her, or there's something happening to her, the way she makes games that has not been like compatible, and that's the reason why she got removed from 2 projects now. So we'll see. Like, I know a lot of people really still respect her, and she deservedly so. Like, she's still a really great storyteller. So, and I do miss a bit of her like deft, lighthearted touch that Naughty Dog has lost since she left, especially once Neil Druckmann took over. So we'll see. Now, story number 4. Bethesda gives a small update on The Elder Scrolls 6. If you've been paying attention to Game Informer's Game Gauntlet, this is a story by Charles Hart from Game Informer, a bracket where readers decide the best game of all time, you might have noticed one contender has been an unstoppable force, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. It nuked Fallout 3, Omnislash Final Fantasy VII, felled Elden Ring without using Spirit Ashes, and survived the hordes of The Last of Us. Skyrim was a groundbreaking open-world adventure when it was first released, and fans clearly have plenty of love for it in the 13 years since then, and now so it's no surprise the gaming community has been clamoring for news about a sequel for years now. Luckily, we do have a minor update for fans who need something to tide them over just a little longer. 30 years ago, the Elder Scrolls series began with the Elder Scrolls Arena, so Bethesda put together a little celebratory post touring through each game in the franchise. The post, which you can read in its entirety in the article from Game Informer, ends with a small section about the highly anticipated next entry. The relevant section says, "Last but not least, yes, we are in development on the next chapter of The Elder Scrolls 6. Even now, returning to Tamriel and playing early builds has us filled with the same joy, excitement, and promise of adventure." There's really not much to go on, but as Kotaku points out, this does confirm that the series will stay on the continent of Tamriel rather than venturing off to other areas in the fantasy world, along with the fact that the game is at least in a playable state. That said, there's no telling how far off from release it still is. The last we heard was from Microsoft's private documents that were leaked during its acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which put the release date somewhere 2026 or later. So, yes, Skyrim was a huge success. Yes, like I played it back in 2011 on PS3. We all know how that PS3 version turned out. I have restarted that game so many times on different consoles. I tried it again on 360, then I tried it again on the PS4. I tried it again on the Xbox One. I tried it again on the PS5. I tried it again on the freaking Series X also. And I always just play for the first. I played through the beginning areas of Skyrim so often, and I always just fall off. And this game is still such a highly respected game that is still such a blind spot for me. And obviously, I did play a lot of Starfield. I played like 100 hours of Starfield. I enjoyed a good amount of those hours, but also a lot of those hours were not enjoyable either. Especially, I call it like a weird reverse shit sandwich, where it's like the bread was shit, but the meat was really good. The things that were on the edges. The first few hours of Starfield were not that good, but then the magic of that game and Bethesda's exploration eventually did seep in for a little bit. That I was kind of like entranced before the game became buggier and it just like lost me. And then like the ending of that story was just so anticlimactic and such a setup for a perpetual New Game Plus loop that then I was like, yeah, this is like, I don't think like this hit like it was supposed to hit. And obviously a lot of people have like really seen that Starfield overall. I think like the consensus now is, especially, give me a second. Now that Game of the Year has passed by and like the Starfield releases has passed by, and the calamity that the Xbox fan base had over Starfield being snubbed from being nominated for Game of the Year in so many outlets, especially in particular when it was not from the Game Awards, Final 6. And I know that pain because Final Fantasy XVI wasn't in that list, but it was like at least that was a more liked game, despite a lot of fake hatred thrown at it over what it's not, because we know a lot. We know when it comes to Final Fantasy, there's always just controversy. But when it comes to Starfield, I feel now it has finally settled as that was actually a really big disappointment, and the lack of updates that Starfield has had over the last few months. Where I think we already, let's see, it came out in September, so October, November, December, January, February, March. We're 6 months away, and the patches that they're doing are so miserly. It's like, no, you can have like expressions and photo mode, or you can eat food right from like where instead of picking it up. It's like, I know like even like a diehard Bethesda fans have been like lamenting the state the state that Starfield is in. That is like it feels so there, that Starfield is just there. Obviously, there's a DLC that's coming. A lot of people that bought that game with the early access to play it a few days early, that's what I did. They do have access to that first expansion, Shattered Space or whatever that thing's called. So despite that, knowing that the expansion is coming, it still feels like Starfield needs more work than it has. And I know a lot of people like take huge umbrage over the fact that that game lacks so much quality of life that the mod community unofficially was able to like put into the game so quickly that then put into questions like, what the hell, why was this not in the game in the first place if a mod could make it work? And the mods that people put in hasn't really hurt the game much. In fact, I would argue it's like if you're on PC, that's where you need to go and install a couple of those mods, because it's actually really cool seeing a more seamless version of that game that's not like so broken by perpetual loading screens. And at least you're able to run it well, because on console it's stuck at 30 FPS, which is not too bad, but PC is the way to go for that game. And I don't know if like maybe the strength and the love of Elder Scrolls V will feed into the hype of Elder Scrolls 6 that has been now 13 years since the last time it came out. But I have now my reservations after Starfield that Bethesda may have been one of those. We used to be king of the hill back then, and now we've been lapped, and we have refused to adapt, and we still remain idiosyncratic in the way we do games, because that's how we always done games, and they just feel like games that are from yesteryear. And to me that's unfortunate, because I wish that when I loved Starfield that had been like their lasting impression. It just sucks that the come down for Starfield for me was like so hard, and then it just exposed like Bethesda for me and be like, I don't know if I really like the way they do games, especially when Cyberpunk Phantom Liberty around that time of release. I was like, crap, it's like, yeah, this is just superior. This is just superior, and I still have to finish Phantom Liberty. So story number 5, staying with similar in a similar fantasy area in games. Larian CEO says the studio is done with Baldur's Gate 3 to focus on something new. Story by Marcus Stewart. Baldur's Gate 3 was one of 2023's most successful and critically acclaimed games, with many hailing it as one of the best role-playing games ever made. However, if you are hoping for the game to get an expansion or a sequel, that won't be the case, at least not from its developer Larian Studios. As reported by PC Gamer, Larian CEO Sven Vinke stated during an address at GDC that the studio is finished with Baldur's Gate 3. That means it won't be getting any expansions, nor will it be making a Baldur's Gate 4. We're a company of big ideas. We're not a company that's made to create DLCs or expansions, Vinke said. We tried that actually a few times. It failed every single time. It's not our thing. Life's too short, our ambitions are very large. Not only that, but the studio's moving on from Dungeons & Dragons in general, with Vinke saying that it's going to be up to Wizards of the Coast, because it's their IP, to find somebody to take over the torch. While Vinke says Larian is proud of what it accomplished, the studio wants to focus on a brand new project. There's no telling what Larian may tackle next. Given that it made Baldur's Gate 3 and the Divinity series, it's hard to imagine the studio not making another RPG of some sort. We'll have to wait and see. I know, like, specifically, I think one of the ways to read the lines, especially when they mentioned the Dungeons & Dragons Wizards of the Coast, is like, from what I understand, they're a really horrible company to work with. They extract a lot from their licenses, and apparently they made so much money from Larian out of Baldur's Gate 3 with them not really doing anything, just being really assets about the IP, that this, alongside my feelings about what happened with Spider-Man 2 and the reveal of their $385 million budget and how much Disney is charging these companies for the license, and seeing like EA saying that they don't want to do more licensed games beyond what they already have worked on, because I bet you people, it's like a lot of these people are sharing these licensed IPs are like overcharging, absolutely overcharging, and that tends to like really, how can I say this? It sucks the oxygen out of these studios making kind of like these games when they have to like deal with overzealous corporate overlords that own these properties, when they could instead take their expertise and do something new, something that they own, that they don't have to like respond to someone else's property. And I believe that's probably what happened with Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian Studios, that they were like, look, it's like we proved the world that we're a top tier RPG developer, kind of like what I was saying with Bethesda. Is like this, they feel like they're currently on that old King Bethesda pocket with how much a lot of people love Baldur's Gate 3. I didn't quite love it as much as people, but also because I barely played it, but it's just not my kind of game. But I respect it. I absolutely respect Baldur's Gate 3 and what it did. And I tell you, if they do something originally, maybe they do it in the sci-fi realm and they still use the same systems, I'm like, maybe that would be the way they get me in, especially if they do a game as expansive that has as many endings and different permutations as this one. So we'll see. It's like I'm glad for Larian, because it's like this is the perfect time for them to not just be morally or not morally, how can I say it? It's like kind of like creatively bankrupt and just like work on someone else's IP when they know that they have the talent to prove the world that they can do that without having to rely on someone else's property. So that's kind of like the vibe that I get from this. And yes, if that means that that's the end of Baldur's Gate 3, I mean, so be it. That's a game that can take you so many freaking hours. And how many endings anyway? It's like, that game's not missing DLC. And they also patched the free epilogue. That's like 15 hours from what I understand, for free. So it's like, they have put in the work for this. So they earned it. Can't wait to see what they do next. Staying in other Final Fantasy stuff. Final Fantasy XVI, the Rising Tide DLC trailer promises a reason to return. Story by Matt Miller from Game Informer. This is also story number 6. Square Enix revealed a new look at Final Fantasy XVI, the Rising Tide, the upcoming piece of DLC scheduled to launch as part of the game's expansion pass. The new story content opens the door to an entirely new area to explore in Balestia, but the big draw is the appearance of the icon Leviathan. Back in December, Final Fantasy XVI players were treated to the echoes of the Fallen expansion. You can go read my review of that expansion over at seasongaming.com. I give it an out of 10. Which took Clive and his companions to a long-abandoned tower created by the Fallen Precursor civilization. The Rising Tide will further expand on the game's story, but in a new direction, focusing on Leviathan the Lost. In the new story sequence, a letter arrives to their hideaway with a request for help from the dominant of that long-lost icon of water, and the party must set out to face a new threat. The new trailer puts a big focus on combat sequences, giving us a look at several fights, including Clive acting as Ifrit to battle against Leviathan as they each coast over a massive body of water. The new sites and characters offer a convincing reason to re-download that massive RPG and take Clive for one more big adventure. The Rising Tide launches on April 18, 2024, so it's very soon. I tell you people, I have rewatched this trailer over and over and over and over and over again, because this uses again, Masayoshi Soken, the composer, used the song that he used for the reveal trailer of this game back in September 2020. Like at the tail end of that trailer is like this male chorus of the Awakening trailer. It was such a hype, like in a game so full of hype musical moments, it was kind of a crime that musical piece from that trailer didn't make it into the game. But Soken announced that entire song is gonna be like in this DLC plus more stuff with what he has put on. And watching that trailer just reminds me why Final Fantasy 16 was my personal favorite game of 2023. Is like there's a euphoric nature to when that game hits that is just unlike any other game. And even now, having beat Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, there's like my hunger for Final Fantasy still hasn't been satiated in a way. And Final Fantasy 16 is so different from 7 Rebirth in systemic and in tone and all of that I'm still so ready to like dive back into the Rising Tide. And I really want to see the more curious things, because I have been reading some of translations that they've been doing some interviews over at Japan, like with sites like Famitsu, and then there's this Twitter account that I highly recommend called Genki that manages to translate a lot of the Japanese into English, and seeing how they've taken a lot of feedback from some of the things that people didn't like from Final Fantasy 16, including specifically side quest design, and how they're like they're gonna add new icons to separate the different side quests, so you actually know which one are important. Because if you play that game as originally, like during the side quests, it's like they only have like the exclamation point in green, and unless they were like the ones with the plus sign that gave you like game-changing rewards, that's kind of how you get your mount. The other side quests eventually then became like Russian roulette, because there were a few that helped build up the world, but it's like maybe not something of interest for you. But then there's a couple quests that are presented the same, that are very important character-based quests that help enrich the world, and you wouldn't know they were important because they were all presented the same with the same icon, other than those plus sign ones that apparently now they want to make sure that at least the character-based ones are like more notable, so people actually do those, and then the other ones are just kind of like there. I did all the cycles because that's how I played that game for review last year, so that's how I found them. And I even made a note in my review that cycles design eventually becomes Russian roulette, because you never know which one of these quests are gonna hit based on that. I want to see how they have improved that icon. And also the thing that interests me is saying that them initially they had said that the ending was gonna like remain the same. Obviously, like Clive's fateful journey to Origin is like that's still gonna remain in place, but they said that completing the 2 DLCs will like open up an epilogue of sorts, or kind of like a new side quest that is just, it's set to be like it should try to round out the story a little bit more. And kind of my hope is that they that this DLC at least makes it clear what happened to Clive, because that they left it a little ambiguous in a way that at least my read of the ending and some of the clues of what they put it kind of like gave me warms and fuzzies how I read it. But I know some people read it differently, and I would like a little bit more clarity, just for, especially when they said that this DLC might be it. This is it. This is going to be the curtain call for Final Fantasy XVI. A wonderful game, in my opinion. And I can't wait to... I've been holding off from doing my Final Fantasy mode replay to platinum the game. That's kind of like the New Game Plus hard difficulty. And I still have my save. I did start a Final Fantasy mode save, but then it's like, because other games were coming out, I was like, I had already spent like 70 hours on that game, which is funny that I spent like close to 140 on Rebirth for review. Tells you how much I like Rebirth even more, as much as I love 16. But I'm still so eager to come back. I would love to relive a lot of those highs. They're so good. Now to address the elephant in the room. I mentioned earlier in the show that I did play briefly Dragon's Dogma 2. And not gonna lie, the launch night of that game, some of the things that came out right before that game launched, initially highly deflated my excitement for it. But let's dive in. One of 2 Dragon's Dogma stories from Game Informer. So the first one, story number 7, Capcom addresses Dragon's Dogma 2 PC performance and microtransaction backlash. Dragon's Dogma 2 is one of the year's most anticipated games, and by most accounts, experience lives up to the hype. The game earned rave reviews from most critics, including Game Informer's 9 out of 10. But now that it's out of the wild, Steam players have bombarded the RPG with negative reviews due to its problematic launch performance and day one microtransactions. In terms of performance problems, Steam players have reported issues such as frame rate drops, freezes, and crashes. Capcom has acknowledged these issues in a Steam blog post where it says, "To all those looking forward to this game, we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience," and adds, "We are investigating and fixing critical problems such as crashes and freezing. We will be addressing crashes and bug fixes starting from those with the highest priority and patches in the near future." In regards to the frame rate issues, Capcom writes, "A large amount of CPU usage is allocated to each character in calculating the impact of their physical presence in various areas. In certain situations where numerous characters appear simultaneously, the CPU usage can be very high and may affect the frame rate. We are aware that in such situations, settings that reduce GPU load may currently have a limited effect. However, we're looking into ways to improve performance in the future. The console versions have their own frame rate issues." I played on PS5, I can attest. As noted by review writer Jesse Vitelli, who noted large-scale battles are where you will see the performance on consoles take a big hit. When I had multiple enemies on screen and upon would cast a big spell, the frame rate dipped tremendously. The game's microtransactions have also drawn ire. In addition to selling Rift Crystals, the game's currency, fans are upset the game sells useful exploration gear such as port crystals, fast travel points that you can place in a chosen destination. Do you still need another item first to use it, which isn't for sale? Capcom is also selling the Art of Metamorphosis book, an item that allows players to redesign their character and revive items, wake stones. You can purchase all of these items at once in the A Boon for Adventurers New Journey Pack bundle, which comes included in the game's deluxe edition. Capcom addressed these complaints in the same blog post, pointing out that the following items can be obtained through normal gameplay. Art of Metamorphosis, the character editor, Ambivalent Rift Incense, Change Pawn Inclinations, Port Crystal, Warp Location Marker, Waked Stone, Restore the Dead to Life, 500 Rift Crystals, 1500 Rift Crystals, 2500 Rift Crystals, Points to Spend Beyond Rift, Makeshift Gal Key, Escape from Gal, Harpy Snare, Smoke Beacons, Harpy Lure Item. If you want extra quantities of any of those items, you have the choice of paying real money of them instead of getting them the old-fashioned way, so they basically serve as optional convenience skips. While it's absolutely understandable why players would be annoyed regardless, this is actually quite normal for Capcom titles. The recent Resident Evil and Monster Hunter games, for example, all offer microtransactions of similar scope and have faced comparatively minimal, if any, pushback. Still, fans are taken aback by their appearance in Dragon's Dogma 2 without context for how rare or easy to obtain these items are. Some players believe the game's intentionally challenging and convenient design aims to push players towards these purchases to ease the experience. Others simply cite the age-old argument that full-price games, $69.99 in Dragon's Dogma case, $70, shouldn't charge additional money for in-game items at all. Combined with the aforementioned performance issues, disgruntled players have flooded the game with bad reviews to the point that it currently has a mostly negative Steam rating just hours after launch. Despite its initial chilly reception, it doesn't appear Capcom will be altering its monetization plans for now. So kind of what I was saying is like, I was so highly anticipated Dragon's Dogma 2 as being like my next big thing to play after Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. In fact, like I even mentioned over at Season Gaming that if for some reason I was able to finish it, maybe I could review it. But how this didn't also mention this, that kind of like when a lot of these reviews started popping out, like Capcom apparently had said in the review guide that they were gonna be microtransactions into like put in the game, but they were not live in the game. What reviewers were able to play for review was like a game completely separate from microtransactions, so that shows that at least the game is balanced in a way that all of that can be played without ever needing to having to buy any of this kind of like easy skips basically. But also the thing that kind of like drew ire with a lot of people is that yes, Capcom has been adding a lot of microtransactions, but how they've been doing it has been kind of like a very thin slippery slope. Like for example, Resident Evil 4 last year, one of the best games of last year, when it launched in literally a year and 4 days ago, there were no microtransactions at all. Like not at all. They got added into the game like a few weeks after when Mercenaries launched, and that was after the review period. Obviously, because already a lot of people had played the game and saw what the balance of that game was, it was like, okay, it's like the game doesn't feel like it has been hurt by the inclusion of microtransactions. And I know because I actually like replayed it recently. Just kind of like, I think, yeah, I actually did. That's why I didn't put it in what I've been playing. I kind of like want to put it in after the fact, and just to kind of play it during its anniversary this last Sunday, or was it Monday? I don't remember. Whenever the 24th was. And when I played it, I was like, yes, like the currency earnings are still the same. The price of weapons is still the same. The price of upgrades is still the same. So it's like I didn't see like, and I remember it very vividly, like how much a bunch of that cost, a bunch of that stuff cost in that game. It was like, yes, you could like pay microtransactions to like upgrade that quicker, but because I had already played the game before, I knew like what that balance was, and it still felt like I was able to fully deck my Leon, and the game felt like balanced enough that like through a normal play and New Game Plus, you could have like full upgrades for everything. They were there. It's kind of like, okay, it's annoying that they have those there, but it's like at least the game doesn't feel compromised, because these microtransactions, on the other hand, like launched at the same time, which this is the first time like another Capcom game has released with microtransactions since DMC5. DMC5 was another game that launched with you can buy packs of blood vials or whatever, those blood echoes. I think what blood echoes was called in that game. That a lot of people were like, crap, they're selling this. Does this mean that they have intentionally made upgrading more grindy to push that? But then when you play DMC5, you realize no, it's like the balance still feels right, just kind of like in line with the older Devil May Cry games for an upgrade curve. With Dragon's Dogma 2, the fact that this game has been sold intentionally as a very attrition-heavy, obtuse game, where They were even in the previous cycle mentioning something like, we think fast travel is like, if you need fast travel, it means that you have designed your open world traversal really boring. And how we're designing Dragon's Dogma 2 is like, it's specific to the way that we think that we made a very intentionally hard game, that the design is all intentional. This is all intentionally hard. But with these microtransactions, what it says is like, yeah, we designed an intentionally hard game, but here's also the easy skips right at launch. So the perception of what that does to this game casts a pall over Dragon's Dogma 2 in a way that wasn't necessary, because it's like, when you play Dragon's Dogma 2, at no point does that game, like when you're buying stuff from stores, all of that, at no point does that game pushes you to get those microtransactions, like at all. Like this game, when you're like in the store, you see the price, you buy the stuff, you can earn like coins in this game actually fairly well. Like if you're like fight a bunch of enemies like in the world and then sell a bunch of that stuff, like you can get sometimes 900 coins for like one piece of like a monster. I was like, okay, that's cool that you can like earn currency like relatively fast, all things considered. So it's like, at no point am I buying an item and be like, you buy this, or just go to the store to buy this stuff. It's like, ironically, the microtransaction store feels like it's so it's like entirely separate and never like highlighted in that game, that it's clear that they actually designed that goal. But the fact that they promoted this thing as such a hardcore thing and people know the existence of the skips makes now having these microtransactions feel extra icky in a way that it didn't in the other games from Capcom that all have them. By the way, I went to look. This has been a practice that Capcom hasn't stopped doing, and it's so funny where they just won Publisher of the Year last year in 2023 for having the highest volume. Sorry, yeah, for having the highest volume of high quality games reviewed over at Metacritic. So it's like, this never really impacted them, even though they've had it. Sorry, I have like a little allergy right now, but it's just this was the worst game to have the microtransactions available at launch. Damn it, crap! This is the worst time for me to get like an allergy hit. Damn you, spring. But yes, like, I don't disagree with the sentiment of what it does, because I know that to me was the fact that I was following Jess Gordon from Windows Central Gaming saying that how those were like just put out right at launch and they didn't really know, but that was because he didn't really read the review guide. But that felt icky to be like, oh yeah, they're waiting for they're just waiting for the good reviews to be out, and then they're gonna like insert this, because that's kind of like what they did with Resident Evil 4, to be like perfectly fair. So that's why like that deflated my excitement like severely early on. But then the more I played it, I was like, okay, you know what? It's like, this does feel more overblown than it really is if you actually play the game. But from the outside looking in, I can understand why it looks dirty. But I can like at least assure you that the microtransaction reaction was like just overblown. But it sucks that they put them in, because it's like, it feels like there is a really great game inside Dragon's Dogma 2. I don't know if I really love the game, because there's so much obtuseness that I'm not in the right mind space for with this game right now, because it's like the attrition of this game is really harsh. I tell you, you really have to like embrace this game on its own terms. And there were moments where I really got it, and there's some insanity that happens in this game. I got like you've probably seen the video of a troll that drop kicks you like randomly, like when you're exploring the world. That happened to me too. I got fucked by a griffin, like as I was getting out of the castle, and then I was trying to fight it, and the griffin would just not leave me alone and then destroy me. It's like, there's just so much dynamic stuff that happens in this game that apparently was also like a cornerstone from the first game. I played it briefly on PS Plus when they gave that game for us back on PS3. I never really fully played it, but it's like, what a lot of people are telling me is that what's wild about Dragon's Dogma 2 is how much it feels like that original game from 2012. How like the design ethos of how Capcom made that game back then have remained in place, which is also so funny that if there's something that I have to give Capcom credit, is how a lot of the design ethos of many of their series has been like so consistent even with new entries. In fact, it feels like I was actually talking with Paul about this. Like, the moment Capcom moved on from like those design ethos during the Crapcom era, the PS3, 360 era, like Resident Evil 6, Lost Planet 2 and 3, and things like and DMC, Devil May Cry. How that those games stopped feeling like how those games used to feel. That was when a lot of negativity. There's my dog. That was when a lot of negativity around Capcom started like simmering more. And then when they went back to like the essence of those games, like for example, I know modern Resident Evil is like, yes, moving and shooting is definitely something new, and obviously that started with Resident Evil 6. But they went back to kind of like the feel and sort of obtuseness of the original games, but not put in like a modern lens. But the feel of that reminds you a lot of like how old school used to be. Devil May Cry 5 plays the exact same way as Devil May Cry 4. Like, they have nailed maintaining the spirit and feel of their franchises, and that is working for them in the modern era. And Dragon's Dogma 2 absolutely feels like another one of those games that a lot of the design ethos is still kind of like remaining in place. They didn't really change what Dragon's Dogma was from like what it was originally, and that hardcoreness is like something that's why a lot of people absolutely adore that original game, even though a lot of people are like also make the joke that is probably the greatest 7 out of 10 game ever, because it's like it was such a weird obtuse game at a time where like obtuse mechanics had not been like made more in vogue, kind of, because let's not forget, it's like Dragon's Dogma came out a few months after Dark Souls. The Souls like still had not like gained the foot that they have now, where now like having more obtuse design feels more accepted. Back then that was like seen as anathema. Dragon's Dogma 2 still feels like it was made from the same cloth of what they did with Dragon's Dogma 1. And I know some reviews saying that the things that it did great, it's doing better now, while the things that it did bad have remained bad. So it's like, and I wonder if the things that remain bad is kind of like that obtuseness that I was mentioning, that it puts it in a kind of like a state of mind where it's like it's not a game that I'm always looking forward to playing. That's kind of why I haven't put as many hours, and I kind of like screwed myself in a way. And also I know Paul told me this, that it's like it's also one of those games that you kind of need a video to kind of people like explain it. And I know eventually I did that with Elden Ring to kind of like get it. That's kind of part of like the charm of those games. But I have realized that sometimes you just want to play a game just to play. I don't want to have like extra. I don't want supplementary material to kind of like make my time more enjoyable to me personally. But there is a time and place for that. And so kind of where I am with that is that this is a game that I'm gonna keep installed. It's like I know there's something there, but this also kind of dovetails into the next story for Dragon's Dogma 2. Eighth and final story for this episode. A Dragon's Dogma 2 update is coming in the near future, but won't improve frame rate. So, a story by Charles Hart. Last week, Dragon's Dogma 2 was released to critical acclaim, followed by intense fan backlash. While the game itself is enjoyable to most, it launched with microtransactions that provide in-game currency, as well as a litany of technical issues, blah 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 blah. We already talked about that. Today, Capcom outlined some of its plans to update the game in the near future, but specifically notes that improvements to frame rate will come in later patches. That said, these quick fixes are still useful. The planned updates for Dragon's Dogma 2, so the updates for all platforms, so that includes PS5, Series X, and Steam. Adding the option to start a new game when save data already exists, which by the way, like they had mentioned already that this game only has one save data. Right now, the only way to like restart if you're not satisfied with the character you created and don't want to like spend the currency to remake it is like you have to go into the system settings and delete the save. So that's wild that they're gonna add a new game option. So changing the number of Art of Metamorphosis items available at Pawn Guilds in the game to 99. So obviously the Art of Metamorphosis is how you can like change your appearance with that game. Making the quest that allows players to acquire their own dwelling where they can save and rest available earlier in the game. They're gonna try to like update a big attrition point. Miscellaneous text display fixes and miscellaneous bug fixes. And now we got updates for PlayStation 5 and Series X and S. Adding the option to switch motion blur on or off in options. Adding the option to switch ray tracing on or off in options. Adding the option to set frame rate to either variable or max 30 FPS in options. And an asterisk. These options will not affect the frame rate significantly. Frame rate improvements are planned for future updates. They put in that. And then an update for Steam. Improving quality when DLSS Super Resolution is enabled. Fixing an issue where models appear low quality under some very specific settings. In addition to general text and bug fixes, there are a few significant quality of life improvements. Yeah, no, this is just a summary of what they're trying to say. So yeah. Why I've also stopped playing, I'm gonna wait for these patches. Because right now, Dragon's Dogma 2, specifically like in the performance mode, I have played many games in 30 frames. I played the majority of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at 30 because it was just that much prettier. And the performance mode of that game was just too blurry for my TV. And even playing in my monitor that I'm recording here, I was trying to play it there with the performance mode, but there was just something weird about the way they did blurring to make that game run at 60. But they patched that now, and they added like a sharper filter for that makes playing that game at 60 FPS actually prettier now, though jaggier in some spots. Even though I feel the soft mode that they added is actually sharper than it was. So I'm waiting for Digital Foundry to really like look into that patch and see the difference, because sometimes you don't know why you're looking. But for Dragon's Dogma 2, they have an unlocked frame rate that when you look at the sky, it feels like it's running at 60, but then when you look down and the things start like getting more popped up with enemies and characters and all that, they already mentioned that this game is very CPU intensive. The frame rate just starts chugging like beneath 30. That is like, and also kind of like there's just something about playing a game that has unlocked frame rate like that sometimes you rather lock the frame rate so it can be more consistent. That's kind of the reason why I enjoyed playing Rebirth at 30 almost in its entirety. That locked 30 FPS looked so good, and it ran so consistently, like it looked smooth in my eyes. Sometimes you want a frame rate lock instead of like a variable frame rate. And shutting off ray tracing will be interesting when they add that to Dragon's Dogma 2, because Resident Evil 4 also has ray tracing on and off features, and when you have ray tracing on in that game, when you're playing at the resolution mode, the frame rate definitely drops. When you shut ray tracing off, the frame rate is more stable. So sometimes ray tracing is something that when you have it on, it can tank performance, and when you have it off, it doesn't. So I definitely would want to turn that off to see if that stabilizes. Motion blur, I'm one of those weirdos that love motion blur, because it's like I love per object motion blur, because it makes moving the camera around at 30 feels smoother. And sometimes really good motion blur can trick your brain into thinking that a 30 FPS image is kind of like 60 FPS is smooth. I know I had that conversation with Paul when Last of Us Part 2 got the 60 FPS update. He thought it was already 60 with how well optimized that game was at 30. So it depends on how well motion blur is optimized, because bad motion blur can be really bad also. Like, or a bad implementation of motion blur can be really bad when you're like moving everything, and it's not per object, it's like just a complete blur moving that can create headaches for people. I would leave it on, because I feel like what they have for motion blur is not that bad. But these things, I'm like it always is with many games, it's like sometimes if you just wait, you're gonna just play a much better game. And that's kind of funny, like with me, like with Reaver, like when I finished that game and published my review and posted the spoiler cast, the patch for 60 FPS sharper images, that's when it dropped. I was like, of course, it had to happen now, after I was done with the game. But at least it's ready for whenever I do my replay, that it's getting closer by the minute. But with this patches, it's like I am in no rush now to play Dragon's Dogma 2. In fact, now as I wait for these patches, this is kind of like what's giving me carte blanche to instead focus on Rise of the Ronin. Because then that way, it's like when I'm done with Rise of the Ronin, which I don't know how long it is, but maybe by the time I'm done with that, because there's nothing of interest that, or at least immediately, like as April rolls around, there's nothing of immediate interest for me until maybe Tales of Kenzera Zao, that is like April 23rd, and then obviously Sandland and Stellar Blade that are on the 26th. So that's literally end of the month. And I know, crap, I still have to play the Sandland demo. I know Paul really loved it, and I said that I was going to do it, but I was like, again, Poe's Reverse Blues are hard. Poe's Reverse Blues are really hard. And so yeah, it's like sometimes it's like, again, like a symptom of modern gaming. The launch experience sometimes is just not going to be the best experience. Sometimes just by waiting, you'll have a better experience. And in this case, I feel like now, as I wait, and as all the fervor around what happened with the launch state of Dragon's Dogma 2 with the microtransaction controversy and all that, after all this is kind of like passes by, I will love to like engage with this game kind of like when it's not part of the hype cycle. That was kind of like the interesting thing of when I finished Elden Ring, because it's like when everyone was like knee deep into Elden Ring in those first few weeks. I was still playing Horizon. I was playing Dark Souls 1. I went back to Dark Souls 1. Like, you probably heard already that story that years, like a couple of years ago here in the podcast. How, like, I did all of that, and then, like, I went back to Elden Ring 2 months after launch. They patched the map for it to look better. Have icons of where to find, like, the vendors. So already I had a better experience, and I kind of, like, the side guys had already slightly died down compared to, like, when it was, like, really that thing, and it was still, I enjoyed playing it when I did, especially, like, these kind of games that require guys. Then a lot of people have already gone through the iteration, so I know better. I will know better, so that was just kind of like a better experience for me. So I feel this is gonna be the same way for me. Even though Dragon's Dogma 2, I don't feel it's like, even though it looked like it was gonna be this year's Elden Ring, it just wasn't. It's just a really great game. It has an 87 Metacritic, but let me see where it landed recently, because it was 87. Yeah, it's still 87 Metacritic. That's still a pretty great game. So 62 makes average score for the users, which, yeah, I'm not surprised with that. But yeah, Reavers is still the highest reviewed game of the year. I still don't think that wins game of the year, because I just know that sometimes like critics can be really snobby about the idea of a remake winning, even though there's more to this game than just a remake. But yeah, and I know a lot of people really love Dragon's Dogma 2. A lot of people are saying it is like, yeah, it's their game of the year. And some people really love that kind of like a really obtuse game that when you conquer it, it makes you feel really good. I realized that I just want to wait until a bunch of this stuff is added so I can keep playing it. And I know Paul is playing it. Paul is not going to play Rise of the Ronin because I bought it in my own account. He's not going to have access to it. So he's definitely going to have more to say about Dragon's Dogma 2 than I will. So I'll definitely can't wait to dig more into Rise of the Ronin after I finish recording this episode. And that's the end of the news section for this week's episode. And there's still just a few quick headlines that I want to read. Shadows of the Damned Hell Remastered invites players to hell again this year. So yeah, Shadows of the Damned was this weird third-person shooter from Grasshopper Entertainment that came out in 2011, legendary year. This was a June game, I remember, June-July game. It was like, so they're remastering it. They're putting it out this year. When? We don't know. They just say that it's coming out this year. I want to know when. Stellar Blade gets a free demo this Friday when this episode posts on podcast services. And so it's so funny because the Stellar Blade, I think this is the Stellar Blade demo that went live early a few weeks ago, that then they had to like remove it and then they had to lock it from a lot of people's accounts. So now it's officially coming out this Friday, and it's also coming out with the option to transfer your save for when this game comes out in a month. So it less than a month now, because that game comes out on April 26th. I love demos that allow you to like transfer saves. And especially I love it when it's demos that what you actually play is actually the beginning of the game. Like, for example, Rebirth did it weirdly, where it was like if you played the Nibelheim section of that game, which was the first thing that they demoed when you download that demo. They updated it later to include the Yunnan part, which is like the open world. That didn't carry over. What was weird about the demo of Rebirth was that what you play wasn't technically the very beginning of the game. It was part of the beginning parts, but it wasn't right at the beginning. So there was a little bit confusion of like, did your completion of the demo really transfer so you can kind of skip stuff and all that? I ended up playing the beginning of that game again anyway. I'm kind of glad it did, because there's a lot of like plot momentum that happens within that those early hours that if the last time you played it was like the month earlier, when you went out in that open world, it's like it would feel a little bit more listless when you were going in that game. But I feel this Stellar Blade demo hopefully will be in the pocket of the Final Fantasy XVI demo, that it was just the first 2 hours. And I still stand by. I recently, one of my clan members, he recently got a PS5, and I recommended him to download the Final Fantasy XVI demo. And I told him, I bet you I'm going to stake my reputation in that after you finish this demo, you will want to immediately buy this game based on how that goes. Like the curtain call of that demo, going to kind of like when the title appears, it's still one of the strongest, like most appealing like demos ever. To like impulse, or to give you like that impulse if you were like on the fence. Like the end of that demo, I do believe is one of those that, crap, I want to see what's next, and then immediately gets you to buy it. So that I hope Stellar Blade does something similar, especially because we're going to be a month removed for the Final Fantasy 16 one was 10 days before the game came out when they did that. So, and those 10 days were torturous. We'll see. I hope Stellar Blade is good. I really hope so. And the last quick headline, Final Fantasy XIV Dawn Trail launches July 2nd, Collector's Edition revealed. And also, there's an early access on June, let me see. This was in July 2nd. I think it was either June 25th or the 28th was like early access for that DLC. If you're like very into Final Fantasy, into Final Fantasy XIV. Finally, the new expansion has been 3 years in the making, kind of like the new start for that game after the initial story arc of that game finished. Now that launches there. It's so funny because they announced this DLC over at PAX East, and the director Naoki Yoshida, he said that he picked this dates in particular because he wanted to get out of Elden Ring's Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, because he knows a lot of people want to play it and he also wanted to play it. So it's so funny. This summer maybe saved by actual DLCs that could keep you occupied. And is Shadow of the Erdtree even remotely as content packed as, or at least just half as content packed as Elden Ring? That's still like a good way to spend the summer, I tell you. And Final Fantasy XIV, like, it's so dense with content already. So it's like, if you want to like catch up, I can imagine that taking you an entire summer too. It's just that kind of like packed game. So, and now I'm gonna read the releases for the week of, let me see, March 31st to April 6th. So it's April now. I can't believe that it's now officially April month. The year is just flying by. Really flying by. And for that week, we only have 3 games. Deceit 2 coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S on April 3rd. Freedom Planet 2 coming to PS5, Xbox Series X and S, PS4, Xbox One, Switch on April 4th. And Turbo Golf Racing coming to PS5, Xbox Series X and S, Xbox One, and PC on April 4th. This will begin what I started calling the calm down, because January, February, and March were so densely packed with games this year that now it's definitely going to go a little lesser, but all eyes are on showcases for whatever happens in May and June to see like what the rest of the year will go. But so far 2024 has been a banger in releases, but not so great for developers, which is so sad. It's like perpetual monkey's paw scenario. And with that concludes this week's episode of the X Button. You can find me at _Joe Segovia on Twitter /X, at Alejandro Segovia 93 on Threads /Instagram, and my written content over at seasongaming.com, where you can read my reviews for The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Skull and Bones, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which went live last week, around kind of like the same time that the podcast, my review spoiler cast that I did with Paul, went live. So you can go watch and read those if you want. What will be my next review? I thought it was gonna be Dragon's Dogma 2. I think it's probably gonna be Final Fantasy XVI's DLC, like I did the first one. So, but hey, you can go read that, and then you can read some of my older stuff over at criticalcorner.com. And then you can follow my buddy podcast part-time co-host Paul over at Dork of Art on Twitter. So, and he'll probably be back next week. So I have to take advantage of him because I'm gonna lose him soon to Parenthood. So I want to thank everyone for listening to this week's episode. I'm glad that I was able to do it. I didn't know if I was gonna be able to do it because of the vacation, but I'm glad I got it out of the way now. It was densely packed with news. So we'll see next week. Hopefully I have more games to talk about of what I'm playing. So sometimes you kind of go through those lulls. But thank you so much. If you like what you like, if you like what you listen, let us know. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review if you want, and your podcast service of your choice. And until then, enjoy the beginnings of hopefully warmer weather. I know there's some places in the United States that are still getting snow, weird stuff. It's a hot hellscape where I am right now. I need rain to come soon to kind of like cool off my country. But until then, enjoy playing games. Go outside, take the sun in, and press X to play. Hasta la vista, baby.